All right, we are at the last of our religions we'll be looking at for our course together. And the last religion on tap is Sikhism. And I think one of the reasons that kind of our textbook and by extension this class save Sikhism for the end is that it really is a kind of hybrid of sorts of the East-West polytheistic monotheistic split that we've been covering over the last several weeks together. Now, technically, it falls under the banner of monotheism, but as we'll quickly see, it's a very different kind of brand of monotheism than as represented by Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, which again we group together as the Abrahamic religions, as the people of the book, so to speak. There's that common heritage shared by all those three that Sikhism really does not. So let's explore this a bit. So Sikhism arises in what we call the Punjab region in India, kind of western India, and is still the heart of Sikhism today. Compared to the other monotheistic religions, really compared to all the other religions, most of the other religions we've looked at, a comparatively small religion, about 24 to 30 million Sikhs around the world, about a half a million of them you find in the U.S. today, and there is a small but fervent Sikh community right here in Grand Rapids. So most Sikhs today, I believe it's something like half of that, or maybe even more than half of that total here, is in that this corner of India today. But you will find Sikh populations and communities scattered around the world. Um, so uh, we'll see Sikhism goes back to the 16th century, and there is kind of in terms of kind of the Punjab population of India today. The Sikh community has roots in the traditional agricultural society in kind of the pre-modern days of India, but it also is for modern Indians. Again, there's about a billion Indians in the subcontinent today. Sikhs tend to be overrepresented in terms of being highly educated and use of technology, and in the kind of the upper echelons of occupations. In the small Punjab state alone, there are four universities. So Sikhs tend to be, from a secular point of view, very comparatively successful. So what makes Sikhism kind of unique? Well, they share lots of things with Buddhism and Hinduism and Islam, as we'll see. In terms of the Indian culture itself, Sikhs took an early stand against the caste system, against child marriage. They tend to eschew alcohol and tobacco as a way of kind of keeping the body, and then also by extension the spirit, pure. They stand for hospitality, taking care of others. Unlike the monotheistic religions, it is the other monotheistic religions we've looked at. It does not preach a kind of exclusivity. That is, that Sikhism is the only way to God. Like many of, or really all of the Eastern religions, there's this underlying idea that there are many paths to God, to God, or the concept of the divine. So they stand for hospitality and the remarriage of widows. Sorry. They stand against they took early stands against what they thought to be kind of societal ills, many of which, as we talked about, are still on the table in India today, and are still things that the culture itself wrestles with. So here's again another version of a map, as we've looked at several of these kinds of maps throughout our time together. So you see, Sikhism here is represented by the yellow. So there's the tiny little blob of yellow here in the north western corner of India. The Punjab region kind of straddles India and Pakistan, so it's a very politically volatile region, and has been for many years to this very day. And so the heart of Sikhism is right there. Kind of zooming in a little bit. So up here, is the Punjab region. So this is Pakistan here. This is still a hotly disputed geographical region as these boundaries were drawn. And so Pakistan is an Islamic country. India has Muslims in it, but it is by and large a Hindu nation. If we had to pick one religion that kind of defined the culture, and the Sikh population kind of sits right between those two, and that certainly has added to the tensions and issues, cultural issues within that territory. Now, so the Punjab, of course, in terms of kind of Indian history and tradition, it is elevated. It's sometimes seen to be the cradle of Indic civilization, one of the earliest organized civilizations in the world. If you remember going back to when we were talking about Hinduism, this is the area where kind of ancient Indian Sanskrit civilization began. But over the centuries, it's been a crossroads of religions. Of course, obviously, kind of the homegrown influence of Hinduism, the arrival of Buddhism. Islam comes in. This territory was conquered in that expansion, that conquest by the heirs of Muhammad following his death. It's a very diverse population, but geographically, politically, culturally, religiously, it is an area that is the Punjab has been an area of extreme conflict. But there's also a place of kind of deep pride. This idea of being from the Punjab, belonging to that area, has usually carries with it a deep kind of nationalist spirit that has never really gone away from its ancient roots to the present day. So Sikhism, another reason that it's last in our textbook and last in our list of things to look at is that in many ways it's the youngest of our major living religions, and it only arises in the 15th and 16th centuries, and so we're talking about 400 or 500 years ago, and so that's a good almost 1,000 years after Muhammad. It's 1,600 years after Jesus. Not to mention the thousands of years after the beginnings of Hinduism and Jainism and the like. And so sometimes Sikhism is defined as a kind of hybrid, a marriage between Hinduism and Islam. And I would say that's kind of a half truth at best. It's not as if you kind of pick and choose like the best of each and thread them together. In fact, I would say in some ways what Sikhism is kind of in many ways born out of kind of a rejection of the extremes of both of these, and then going from there. So it's not really Sikhism isn't an attempt to kind of combine these two. It does have it would be a bit of an insult to say that it's just a kind of a patchwork of these other religions. It has a distinct founder. This figure we know as Guru Nanak, the first of the major Sikh gurus, and he's the first to preach this new kind of monotheism. And so, by tradition, Nanak is the one who sees kind of the inherent weaknesses in the local Hinduism, and also the abuses of kind of the Islamic power political structure around him. He saw kind of Hinduism was kind of retreating into kind of over ritualization, kind of a hyper attention to kind of the bells and whistles of the religion. He saw Islam, he saw beauty in the Islamic faith, but he also saw that when it kind of turned into a political philosophy, it could be oppressive and strayed from its roots as a spiritual discipline. And so he says, neither nor, neither that kind of that ritual retreat of Hinduism, nor the political overlordship of Islam. So he preached a path of personal devotion, bhakti. We use that word when we were talking about Hinduism. This your own personal path, and a more kind of mystical path. So his kind of approach to God was a much more emotional, much more spiritual approach, a much more kind of rooted in faith as a kind of a valuable thing in and of itself, in contrast to kind of the hyper ritualized, politicized religions that were surrounding him during this era. So yes, in the 15th century, there was an extreme kind of polarization. The Muslim overlords were the oppressors. They were the political aggressors. And the local Hinduism fled and went back into those old ways of idol worship. And Nanak said that neither of these things are good. So, and he wasn't trying to really kind of push back against Islam and push back against Hinduism, rejecting them in any kind of way. He says no, there's got to be a way to bring this all together, to find a path that we can all follow. So here's a couple of sayings that are associated with Nanak that I think get at kind of his personal philosophy. The age that that is the time in which he lived is like a knife. Kings are butchers. Religion has taken wings and flown in the dark night of falsehood. I cannot see where the moon of truth is rising. So he was. I think in some ways he was saying that there's a good way to do politics. There's a good way for religion to be at the center of culture, and it does no one any good when those in charge are oppressing, and as a result, religion, ritual, faith, and belief flees to the corners. Here's another saying: modesty and religion have disappeared as falsehood reigns supreme. The Muslim mullah and the Hindu pandit have resigned their duties. The devil reads the marriage vows. Praises of murder are sung, and people smear themselves with blood instead of saffron. So, as we saw with lots of these Eastern religions, that they take on their most definite shape during times of political upheaval. I think it's true of Taoism, of Confucianism, of Buddhism, aspects of the development of Hinduism, and so in this, I think that Nanak is no different. There's got to be a better way to confront the chaos of the day and age. So what do we know about him? He's one of these figures that, again, exists probably more in kind of tradition or folktale or myth than he does in kind of real historically documented sources. I mean, nobody doubts that he was a real figure, but the traditions about him are hard to nail down. Born in the Punjab region in the year 1469 CE AD. The sources of the problem with the historicity of it is that the sources are mostly poems and hymns with a little bit of biographical material sprinkled in. There's a collection of biographies about him that appears much, much, much later, and that's always an issue when it comes to historic fact. He's not a divine figure. I mean, never claimed divinity in the same way that the Mahavir or the Buddha. They also never claimed divinity, but certainly revered as the first guru, as the founder of this religion. So some of the stories that surround him are these legends of him as a boy that presage greatness to come. So there, prophecies about him. He will worship and acknowledge but one formless Lord. Kind of a rejection of all those millions of Hindu deities. One formless, kind of abstract divine, and he will teach others to do so. This also said by the age of 7 months, he's still a baby. It said he could sit in the lotus position like a yogi, and meditate and pray. So I mean, there's a familiar kind of story that we've seen. The story goes he was born into a high caste, the Kshatriya, the warrior, the ruler caste, the highest. But he came to despise the whole notion of castes and dividing society in this way, and saw the injustice of it. So very similar to the Buddha, born to wealth, born to privilege, but rejects it at its root. And there's probably the most famous story that illustrates this is that he saw the injustice of this at an early age. Is when he was 11, he was forced to participate in a Hindu ceremony in which the boys in the high caste wore a thread, like a sash, to mark their high status. Always reminds me of the if you know the Dr. Seuss story with the Sneetches. The Sneetches with the stars on their bellies are the better Sneetches, and the ones without are lesser. So he was one of these Sneetches with a star on his belly. But Nanak, he refuses. And here's a translation of kind of his reaction, his enraged reaction to this. How can you differentiate between people by these badges? It is by their actions that you should categorize them. Let compassion be your cotton. Spin it into the yarn of contentment. Give it knots of continence and the twist of truth. The thread so made will neither snap nor become soiled. Blessed is the man who wears such a thread around his neck. That's pretty eloquent for an 11-year-old kid. But this idea, it's very kind of Martin Luther King Jr. Judge us by our character, not by the color of our skin or the caste that we happen to be born into. So as his life goes along, he lives a kind of a monk's life, devotes himself to prayer, meditation, and fasting. He ultimately, as we noted above, comes to reject both the Muslim and Hindu ways, and says, I will seek God on her own terms. Um, he there are stories where he claims to have a very early mystical experience of God, composes his first poem. Here's part of it. Here he has kind of the revelation that kind of God is one, is eternal. But you'll notice that the kind of the language about God is one, on the one hand, it's not the polytheism, millions of fragmented deities in Hinduism, nor is it the personal God of Christianity. It is more kind of the abstract, mystical notion of divinity that is impossible to describe by definition. There is one God, eternal truth is his name. Maker of all things, existing in all things, fears nothing, at enmity with nothing, beyond time not begotten, being of his own being, by the grace of the Guru made known to men. So there you can see, I mean, some of that language, it sounds kind of almost Judaic or Christian. Very God of very God, simply there, never begotten. This is a God that's always been, was not created, simply is. It's in some ways has lots in common with kind of that Judaic Christian Islamic idea of kind of ultimate deity, and pushing it back against the hyper polytheism of Hinduism. Now, probably the most famous tradition about Guru Nanak are his travels, and so he goes on these kind of not missionary journeys, but so here's the Punjab region, kind of the area that he was from. But for 20 plus years of his life, he's on the road and he travels all over the place. Kind of most famously through the Arabian Peninsula to Mecca and up into the Levant and to Jerusalem, and here he meets Muslims, and he meets Jews, and he meets Christians, and he meets Buddhists, and he meets Shiites and Sunnis, and he meets with and talks with and debates with all of these various different leaders all around India and Nepal and Tibet, and before returning to Pakistan with this really kind of comprehensive, kind of mystical view of God, and this idea that there are many paths to God, and he offering kind of a way out for the local people of political oppression, as well as kind of the dizzying polytheism of Hinduism. So in Sikh tradition, there have been 10 kind of mortal human gurus, and so here's Nanak at the first, and then kind of counterclockwise here, the dates and the names of the various gurus throughout the ages, and then in the early 18th century, the mortal human guru is replaced with the final guru, which is the holy book of Sikhism, the so-called Guru Granth Sahib. And so every kind of Sikh place of worship, called a gurdwara, will contain a kind of a place of honor and sanctity for this book. And so Sikh ceremonies will almost always involve kind of bringing out the book. They really treat the book as kind of a living thing. In the morning, it's taken from its place. It's almost like the guru is woken up, and hymns and prayers are sung from the Granth Sahib. And so since roughly 1706 or so, this book has kind of said, okay, this is the final guru, and this is the book is seen to be kind of a living, breathing thing, and inheriting the mantle of the 10 great Sikh gurus that preceded it. Now, Sikh men in particular are very easy to spot, particularly in the Western kind of secular world. You'll notice a Sikh man usually by kind of a long beard, again depending on the age of the man, and the turban. And the turban is a symbol that the Sikh man has gone through what they call the Amrit ceremony, the kind of this coming of age, kind of like a Sikh bar mitzvah. as it were. It's a mark of manhood and kind of the taking on the duties and responsibilities of being a Sikh male. The turban itself is strictly not a religious ceremony. It's really kind of a mark of kind of a transition, a cultural transition for a man passing from adolescence into manhood. It's one of these things that is largely still kind of misunderstood, and it's often taken to be an Islamic symbol. This was certainly the case kind of following 9/11, where the turban was immediately associated with Islam, and of course it's has nothing, absolutely nothing to do with Islam at all. That's a complete misreading of the symbol. I've had a number of Sikh students taking this very class, this religion class, over the years, and I talked to them, and I asked them, how often is kind of your dress mistaken for is having to do with Islam, and they still say all the time. I mean, often just very innocently, not not in a pejorative, kind of angry, racist kind of way. Although it can take on those forms, but it's more just kind of just a misunderstanding of what these things mean. Sikh men will also traditionally wear or have as part of their appearance what are sometimes called the four Ks. The kesh, the long hair, kind of you grow your hair. You don't cut your hair, especially the beard, as a sign of kind of spiritual devotion. The kara, the bangle, you wear on your hand. The circle, representing eternity, and it's also been explained to me that it's kind of you're almost like handcuffed to truth. They wear this dagger around their shoulder on a strap in a sheath, and it's more about the symbolism. That is, you are called to defend the weak, to defend the poor, to defend the widow, to defend the truth, more than you are really called, to actually whip it out and to wield it. It's a symbol of your dedication to protect those who need protecting. The kasha, the white shorts. Representing kind of your commitment to purity, and then the kanga, the wooden comb, which holds the kind of your long hair kind of balled up into a kind of bun and held together, and then the turban is over at the top of that, and a symbol of cleanliness and sanctity and proper grooming. Cleanliness is next to godliness in a way. And so the Sikh male who goes through the initiation of the Amrit ceremony then promises to wear each of these sacred symbols, and having them, of course, on your body at all time is a constant physical reminder of what you've dedicated your life to. So there's the kara, the bangle, that kind of represents kind of eternity and your commitment to the truth. There's a very elaborate kirpan sword here. We see a Sikh male here in full kind of ceremonial dress. Sikh men also by their name also will usually have Singh, Singh, in the kind of the English transliteration as part of their name. So somebody who has the name Singh, it's almost always a dead giveaway that they come from the Sikh tradition. Sikh, if you kind of pick a Sikh symbol, the symbol that you see here, the khanda, is probably the most recognizable. As it says here, the symbol or emblem of Sikhism is known as the khanda, is made up of the khanda, a double-edged sword, the shakar, which reminds Sikhs to remain within the rule of God. The kind of also kind of mimics the kara, the bracelet, and two crossed kirpans, the daggers that represent spiritual authority and political power. Probably the building that would probably function as the most sacred place for Sikhs is this extraordinary complex here. It's called the Harmandir Sahib, in Punjabi, in Sanskrit, but it's usually referred to by the kind of its English title, the Golden Temple. And so this is in the Punjab region, and it's this temple here that's kind of in the middle of this clearly kind of man-made lake that's surrounded by this massive courtyard here, and then connected to the edge by this long causeway here. And so here is, again, every day they have the Granth Sahib, the book. They will take it out. They will sing songs. They purify, and I think they clean the floor ritually with water and milk on a daily basis. And its most famous is for its kind of kitchens of hospitality. And so one of the most recognizable, and in my opinion, one of the most wonderful things about the Sikh tradition is their commitment to hospitality and to feeding people. And so each temple, each gurdwara will have a kitchen, and anybody can come and they will serve you a simple meal of naan bread and lentils and potatoes. Um, and it doesn't matter. You don't have to be Sikh. All are welcome, and so they are dedicated to kind of physically helping humanity. So you can even see in this picture that many people are kind of lining up to come and to visit the temple and to participate in that hospitality. Here's a lower angle shot here. You can see that causeway. You can see many of these worshippers waiting to get into the temple over here. Extraordinary complex. I'm dying to go there and to see it for myself one day. And here is in a different angle and different light there, you can see kind of the wonderful and complex architecture of it. And it just kind of this shining, glittering thing out on the lake. It strikes such a dramatic pose as architecture. All right, that's all I got for Sikhism for you today. So have a look at the Blackboard page and pay attention to kind of some of the wrap up features and details about the final exam. And I will talk to you soon.